Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. This is the third panel, and we'll be looking at case studies, the importance of civil society. We have on our panel Catherine Cosman from the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, Alisher Kamindov from SAIS, Johns Hopkins University, we hope will be here soon, and Mehmet Kalyoncu, an independent analyst, will also be speaking in regards to the importance of civil society and case studies. So I'm going to throw it over straight to Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you. Hope you've all had time to digest your lunches and the very interesting morning session. I want to start with a few generalizations and then go to some specifics on government policies towards religious communities. Not so much, I won't be discussing so much the very wide variety of religious life in the countries of the former Soviet Union, because it's a topic for an entire conference or three in and of itself, because many of the world's major religions and many of the world's minor religions are represented, speaking numerically, of course, in the former Soviet Union. And as far as public influence or influence in society, a lot of times that depends on the government attitude towards a given religious group. But of course, sometimes the activities of a religious community in society as a whole obviously also influences the role that it plays. Post-Soviet ideology, which obviously emphasized atheism and carefully controlled religious life, has also left a big legacy in the countries of the former Soviet Union. And most people in that part of the world, like many other places, are searching for new belief systems, which of course include religion prominently. Post-Soviet governments often view the majority religion as an ally, for example, the Moscow Patriarchate of the Russian Orthodox Church, or as potential allies and rivals, for example, Islam in Central Asia. As a result of all these factors, post-Soviet governments try to control religion in various ways, which is the main topic I'll be discussing, through registration regulations, religion laws, and extremism laws, which also, and in addition, within each of the major religions, they have set up or encouraged the development of communities which are officially approved and others which are not. So it's a rather large topic, and I'll try to address as many aspects of it as I can in the limited time that I have. I'll take a couple of countries as examples, and those are Belarus, Russia, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. I'll first talk a little bit about registration policies. For example, Belarus, the religion law sets up 3 categories of religious groups and sets up a very complex registration process. In the registration processes in all these countries require that those who want to establish a religious community supply the state with very detailed personal information, which in the post-Soviet context gives rise to considerable apprehension. While many groups in Belarus have managed to register, it is illegal for an unregistered religious community to function at all. In other words, if you have not publicly declared yourself to the state, then your activities are viewed as illegal. In Russia, it's a little different. While you can function as an unregistered religious group, and you have certain rights, for example, to hold worship services, you cannot own property, hire religious leaders on a formal level, and publish literature. If you're registered, which you then must do every year, then you have much wider rights. Possibly the most restrictive registration procedures that I know of exist in Tajikistan, which were established only in 2009. And for example, for me, one of the most prominent aspects of that is if you're among the 10 adult citizen founders, you have to present a certificate from local officials that you have lived in that specific area for at least 5 years, and during the course of that time, you have always held the same views which have led you to establish this religious group. In addition, the charter must specify all aspects of your activity, and you must register every year. And for all of these countries as well, if you're found to violate provisions of registration, you know, there are various kinds of penalties, ranging from fines and in some cases to imprisonment, depending on the legal terms. In Uzbekistan, also unregistered religious activity is illegal, and if you violate that provision, you may face huge fines, police raids, and possible arrests. Kazakhstan, I won't go into, but if people have questions about that, I can try to answer that. In Russia, turning to the practical difficulties of registration, if you have to register not only on the local level, but also at the national level, and you have to do this every year. And while most religious groups in Russia have managed to register, some have not, and particularly they've had difficulty on the local level. In some cases, there are charges that the Russian Orthodox Church or whatever is the majority religion in a given area puts pressure on the local officials to not allow in other groups. In Turkmenistan, even though the penalties for violating registration were removed from the administrative code to the criminal, from the criminal code to the administrative code, nevertheless the penalties for violating those provisions remain the same. In other words, you can be imprisoned if you are found to violate those terms. In Uzbekistan, the government has closed down 3,000 of the 5,000 mosques that existed in the early 1990s, and several mosques, particularly in the Fergana Valley, which is the country's most religiously active area, have been refused registration even though they meet all the legal requirements. And as far as the penalties for violating various provisions of religion laws, I can give some specific examples. For example, in Turkmenistan, there's a Pentecostal pastor who last year was sentenced to 4 years of imprisonment on false charges of swindling, and both his family and members of his congregation were brave enough under Turkmen conditions to say in court that those charges were false. In Uzbekistan, which, by the way, has the largest number of political and religious prisoners, has more prisoners than all the other post-Soviet countries combined. It has an estimated 5,000 prisoners who have most of whom have either not practiced Islam the way the government thinks they should, or are charged for belonging to allegedly extremist groups, political groups, some of which have a religious linkage. But none of these charges are ever proven, nor has it been proven that these people advocate or have engaged in violence, in the most part. I mean, there are a few exceptions, of course. But as far as violating just provisions under the religion law which do not involve being involved in so-called extremist groups. 49 people were sentenced in last year alone. For example, in April of last year, 3 women were convicted to minimum 6-year terms for allegedly threatening the constitutional order, and that consisted of them privately teaching young women about Islam. The other defendants from among the group of 30 who were originally arrested, some were reportedly threatened with rape if they did not testify, and some of them later disappeared. No one knows where they are. Non-Muslim groups are also subjected to very severe restrictions. One of the largest Protestant churches in Tashkent was raided, and 8 church members were arrested and detained. They didn't get long sentences, but they were briefly detained. How am I doing on time? As far as provisions of religion laws, just to give you an idea of the legal constraints that all religious groups operate on in some of these countries. In Belarus, foreign citizens are not allowed to lead religious activities. Your religious activity is restricted to the geographic area in which you are registered. Unless you're registered, you cannot train clergy or distribute, print, or import religious material. In Kazakhstan, I do want to mention Kazakhstan briefly because they were considering a very restrictive religion law, but the Constitutional Court overturned that. However, the Kazakh parliamentary calendar has set late this year as a time to reconsider the amendments to that religion law, so it may in fact pass again. And that would have also involved, for example, making unregistered religious activity illegal. In Russia, the very important trend that Russia helped set in motion was to designate certain religions as more traditional in the country than others. So 4 religions have been designated in the preface to the religion law: Russian Orthodoxy, Islam, Judaism, and Buddhism. Even though this has no legal footing, nevertheless, various Russian officials don't understand the distinction between the preface to a religion law and the law itself, and therefore they act on that basis and view with suspicion all other religious groups. And in fact, if you're Orthodox and the wrong variety of Orthodox, you can also have lots of problems. I also want to talk a little bit more about Tajikistan's religion law. Tajikistan, which, as you know, is a northern neighbor of Afghanistan and a particularly fragile state, as the International Crisis Group just pointed out yesterday, that, for example, the mosques are under particularly strict regulation. They set population quotas for the various sizes of mosques, and if the government thereby decides that there are too many mosques in an area with too few people, or too many people, depending on the criteria set up, then the mosque is not allowed to be built. And if there are too many mosques and they don't have official approval, the government closes them down or simply tears them down, as it has done repeatedly this year and last year. The law also bans private religious education, which is something I should mention is another frequent feature of religion laws in this part of the world. Or at least it very severely restricts that. That's also true in Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. I wanted also briefly to turn to how extremism laws are used in various of these countries to restrict legitimate religious activity. One of the key features of the extremism laws in most post-Soviet countries, with the odd exception of Turkmenistan, is that it does not require advocacy or use of violence. That's not even a criterion under extremism. Although, and in the various interstate agencies have also decided that various largely Muslim groups are terrorist. Some of them, in fact, are. However, many of them are not. And the criteria for banning are very vague, and often eases the way for arrests of people on either fake charges or actual charges of belonging to these groups. The point being that membership in a banned group is the criterion for arrest. It's not a specific action that's undertaken. And also, Russia has set up a very large list of so-called extremist literature, which includes the writing of Said Nursi, and Jehovah's Witnesses. Scientologists were recently removed from this list. There's now an ongoing debate as to whether or not the Zines of the protocol, the Protocol of the Elders of Zion should or should not be included on this list. Again, you face criminal charges and prison sentences if you're found to distribute and own this literature. Anyway, there's a lot more to be said, and I've run out of time. Thank you.
We'll have time during question time, I'm sure, to elaborate. Thank you very much, Catherine. Now, seeing as our second speaker is not here, we'll move on straight to Mehmet Kalyoncu. Thank you very much, Mehmet.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I'm delighted, of course, to be part of this very important debate. The issue that we try to address at this conference today is the role, the impact of civil society on peace building, conflict resolution, and democratization. But I guess we should revise that order as conflict resolution, peace building, and democratization. The reason is the following. As a first step, the conflict resolution may eliminate the conflict, but the absence of conflict does not necessarily or automatically mean the presence of peace. Today, for example, 16 years after the Dayton Agreement, can you guys hear me?
Closer.
Today, actually, 16 years after the Dayton Agreement, there is no conflict among the Bosniaks, Croats, and Serbs in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but there is no peace either. After all, peace building is a process that takes place where all the concerned parties are dedicated and willing to achieve peace. It is the process of building upon that collective will to achieve the peace. And we all agree that the democracies flourish with the state and non-state institutions that are transparent and open enough to allow their citizens monitoring of and participation in these institutions, which in and by itself constitutes the core of the functioning civil society. Now the question is, what if the community does not have the ability to organize in such a fashion at the first place? What if the community is divided along the ethno-religious lines? What if these different ethnic and religious groups have directly or indirectly engaged in conflict, or at least have not interacted closely because of the entrenched prejudices among each other? So the question is, the fundamental question is, how do you get to a functioning civil society from such an ethno-religiously fractured community? As we all listened today, theoretically, civil society is characterized by the presence of voluntary, civic, and social organizations. Run by the informed citizens and the groups, these non-governmental organizations assume responsibility for monitoring governmental institutions and for mobilizing the available resources to maintain order and efficiency in these not only in these governmental organizations, but in the society in general. The underlying assumption is that coming together of the citizens around either political or non-political causes is a crucial prerequisite to achieving a functional civil society and strong democracy. So the key is citizens coming together for a common cause. The analysis of Gülen-inspired civil society initiatives in southeastern Turkey, and specifically in the city of Mardin, suggests that they have these civil society initiatives, or as it is called generally, the Hizmet movement, has been to a certain degree successful in bringing together different ethno-religious groups in the city of Mardin as a necessary first step towards building civil society. Namely, the Hizmet movement identified, together with the local people, the common problems facing them all, regardless of their different ethno-religious identities. Here I'm trying to talk about the process through which this Hizmet movement is initiating building the civil society. And then the movement, when I say the movement, I mean all these individuals affiliated with this movement. They provided, through the collaborative efforts of those people, the solid services to address those common problems. As a result, this process, which required individual participations, has created a civic consciousness of being Mardinian and the citizen of Turkey beyond their respective ethno-religious identities. So they have realized that, well, I may be Kurd, Turk, Arab, or Assyrian Christian, but first I'm a Mardinian and I'm a citizen of this country. To be more specific, in Mardin, a multi-ethnic city, some of you may be familiar with this city, multi-ethnic city populated by ethnic Turks, Kurds, Arabs, and Assyrian Christians on Turkey's Syrian border. The affiliates of the Hizmet movement have, through their personal interactions and conversations with the local people, first convinced them, the local people, that the fundamental problem of their community was the lack of education and educational infrastructure in the city. Second, they promoted multicultural understanding and tolerance towards the other ethnic religious identity. And finally, these local people, the movement got these local people personally involved in finding resources through local or outside donors and making concrete progresses on the ground. In so doing, the Hizmet movement has been able to create a Mardinian civic consciousness among the Turks, Kurds, Arabs, and Assyrians living in the city. Moreover, the movement's activities in Mardin have centered on providing educational facilities such as schools, university prep courses, reading halls, as well as providing humanitarian assistance such as food and clothing distribution. Of course, it's important to understand the security environment where these activities were taking place. Mardin was heavily affected by the ensuing conflict between the Turkish armed forces and two terrorist organizations, PKK and Hezbollah, respectively starting in early 1980s and early 1990s. And this conflict, continuous conflict, deprived the city of basic infrastructure, investment, and educational facilities. And at the same time, these conflicts sort of deepened the ethno-religious fault lines among these groups. Against this backdrop, the affiliates of the movement first established personal contacts with the local people in the late 1980s. Their conversations focused on the necessity of providing modern education to the young generations, which would in turn help them to be productive citizens and benefit their community. So it is that simple. They just initiated conversations which focused on the necessity of education, but not just preaching about the necessity of education, but also getting those people involved personally, no matter how much they have, no matter how much they can contribute, but getting them personally involved in implementing these projects. With the cooperation of these local people from the very beginning, the movement has institutionalized. It's also very important. The movement has institutionalized these efforts by opening university prep courses, schools, and reading halls. It opened the first university prep course in Mardin city center in 1992, and later in the surrounding counties, such as Kızıltepe, Derik, Nusaybin, and Midyat, some of which were under the heavy influence of either PKK or Hezbollah. These university prep courses have been pretty successful in terms of attracting the local youth, despite the continuous threats by both PKK and Hezbollah. The main reason was that these prep courses were pretty much the only means for them to possibly go to university, and for their parents to keep their teenage children away from the PKK and Hezbollah's forced recruitment. Moreover, the movement established a private school, which included all three of elementary, secondary, and high school levels, and the construction of this school was not funded by the state, but by a Mardinian businessman contacted by the affiliates of the Hizmet movement, and who was living in Istanbul. Besides teaching the school, besides teaching arts and sciences, as well as English as a second language, the school prioritizes the development of its students' social and physical skills. Throughout the year, it organizes many events, including science fairs, art exhibitions, music performances, and sports tournaments. I will give you two examples with regard to the impact of this school. At the end of the school year, the student clubs organize a fair where they showcase their yearly activities. The school administration encourages the students to invite as many people as possible to vote on their projects during this contest. And every year it averages about 5,000 people. And the school administration believes that this kind of practice and this kind of activities help the students adopt democratic practices such as free and fair elections. Furthermore, the school organizes public seminars and social gatherings with the local people. So it's not just about teaching the students, but also connecting with either parents or those who don't have any kids at the school. Through these seminars, the school administration shares its future projects with the local people and seeks their involvement in implementing them. Such a close and continuous engagement with the local people, and hence the confidence built in the school, have also changed some of the deep-rooted practices in Mardin, such as not sending their daughters, not sending girls to the schools. For instance, I talked to a Kurdish mother who didn't speak Turkish, and I spoke to her through an interpreter, and she said, and I quote, "I was not allowed to go to even elementary school and was forced to get married at a very young age. I did not have much say in my family affairs, but I'm quite happy for my daughter Hatice, because she is going to school now in Balıkesir, a western city of Turkey, through the arrangement, scholarship arrangement of the movement. Even now, at the age of 15, her father consults her opinion, and she is able to influence her father's decisions. and she will be a strong woman and good mother. Finally, the Hizmet movement has established in Mardin, respectively, Reading Halls Association and Village Development Association. Of the two, the first opens reading halls in the distant counties of Mardin. And these reading halls serves as a substitute for the university prep courses. By providing the children children of school age with reading and study materials, these reading halls aim to keep the children and youth off the streets from where they are normally prone to be recruited by PKK or Hezbollah. Similarly, the Village Development Association keeps constant contact with more than 150 villages. It organizes food and clothing distribution, and in cooperation with the school and the university prep courses, they identify the students who need assistance to go to school. And I guess very importantly, the regular visits paid to the parents by the teachers, especially by the female teachers, convince the parents to send their daughters to school, because they see, they meet with the female teachers, and that builds confidence with the parents. And so the Gülen-inspired civil society initiatives in Mardin, or the Hizmet movement in general, have all commonly focused on developing the human capital of the city and a civic consciousness among its residents, among its citizens, so that the different segments of that community can come together, despite their ethno-religious differences, to address their common problems, ranging from the lack of education to lack of investments, and from chronic unemployment to youth radicalization. The movement has emphasized the importance of human agency and the ability of the society to meet its needs without completely relying on donors or the state funding or the state itself. Consequently, the necessity of law and order to sustain and protect what has been achieved through this collective effort has cultivated their respect and quest for the rule of law and democracy, because they want to protect what they have achieved together. It in turn laid the foundation for a sustainable and functional civil society in Mardin. And I
Thank you. We might actually reschedule. This will be good for you. I can screen with that. Okay, by way of. Okay, we're playing tag. All right, this one's better for us, I assume. Thank you very much. At this stage, we don't have our third speaker, so we'll move straight into a question time. If he does arrive, we will, depending on time, allow him to speak. By way of background, just so that you know, the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom's current report is downloadable off their website, and Mehmet also has a book as well that further discusses what is presented here in more detail, so you can follow up on both publications for your information. If I may start with the first question to Catherine. Over the last few years, and maybe going back to a decade, what's getting better, and is there anything getting worse?
Well, certainly people from Russia are allowed to travel to foreign countries a lot more freely, and there is in general much greater freedom of expression, at least on the internet and to your friends, and in public. There's a greater variety of religious groups which are sort of jostling for membership, and public visibility. But unfortunately, I think increasingly the governments of this part of the world as they're coming to terms with civil society and in a very wide sense, not just NGOs, look at religious groups and see that perhaps they're the one area of civil society that they have not totally, through laws, mainly very restrictive laws, not managed to curtail as much as they would like. And at the same time, I think also something I probably should have mentioned, that the Soviet system, out of which all the leadership comes, was very suspicious of religion, to put it mildly. And so the leaders still, for the most part, have that kind of suspicion, but also instrumentalize religion as a way of harnessing notions of national identity, and therefore they play to the majority religions, although they also, keep those religions within the restrictive laws that I've described. So it's a very complex picture. A lot of some groups, for example, Jehovah's Witnesses, increasingly are being viewed as extremist throughout this part of the world, and other religions that are viewed as new, such as evangelical Protestants, often also have a lot of problems. So it's a very complicated picture, because we're talking about, in the case of Russia, 10 time zones. So obviously it's a little hard to generalize, and the picture, as far as Russia is concerned, varies a lot from region to region, and a lot of it depends on how liberal or not the governor is, and what are the particular kinds of political pressures put on, and in some cases religious pressures put on the local government. So I don't want to sound entirely negative, because obviously there's a lot of positive stuff going on as well, but unfortunately, the governments don't want to lose control. So I think that's the major negative.
And one question to Mehmet. Regarding the PKK, I remember a news item that he said that they saw the Gülen movement as a major threat to themselves and to recruitment. And you specifically spoke about, of course, Mardin, but is this replicated in other areas in southeast Turkey, northern Iraq? Are you able to elaborate, or was this specific to that particular city?
Well, it's not specific to that city, and Mardin is pretty much representative of actually southeastern Turkey, and I believe, our Mr. Bilal can vouch for that. It also represents the region as in general, because there are actually Kurds, Turks, Arabs, Assyrian Christians living in vast geography in that area. And right, I also read that news that PKK views these Hizmet movement initiatives as a threat to itself, normally, because they stand for everything that they are against. Actually, they are against those people rising up to responsibility, to addressing their problems by themselves through cooperation with each other, instead of blaming for everything, for every problem, blaming the state. And of course, the more people are educated, the less they are prone to manipulation. I guess that's the reason why they are viewed as a threat to this organization. Yeah.
Okay, let's move to questions from the audience. I just received a message. Dr. Kamindov has had a personal emergency, so he sends his apologies, so I thought I should relay that. If you have a question, please raise your hand. We would ask that you stand just so we can, because we're taping this as well, so it may be difficult. Yes, please, sir, at the front.
Hi, my name is Kyle Rourke. I'm with the Department of State. I just have a question in the scope of the June 2010 violence in Kyrgyzstan between the ethnic Uzbeks and ethnic Kyrgyz. Could you talk a little bit of the role of the mosque as a mitigating factor for such violence, or conversely, if you think kind of the resurgence of Islam in Central Asia is serving as a driver of conflict, since some groups like the Uzbeks are more religious historically than the Kyrgyz?
Oh, I didn't talk about Kyrgyzstan particularly. Kyrgyzstan also, under the previous government, under the Bakiyev government, adopted a very restrictive religion law, probably as restrictive in many ways as the recent Tajik law. Although I think the Kyrgyz law was more against missionaries from afar, both Muslim and Christian. So, in fact, I just recently talked to some Kyrgyz parliamentarians and proposed that they reform that law, and they said, yes, it's on the books, and they've long advocated for that. Of course, it's easy since it was the previous government's law, but nevertheless, to be fair, they say that after the October parliamentary elections, this law will be reconsidered. As far as the mosque being a meeting ground, I suspect, I'm not positive of this, that mosques were divided along ethnic grounds. So Kyrgyz mosques, Kyrgyz went to one mosque and Uzbeks to another. And as you correctly observe, Uzbeks are more traditionally observant than Kyrgyz. So that's another complicating factor. But I would use this opportunity to say that I'm very concerned about the potential for future violence in the Fergana Valley as a whole, which is split up among Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, speaking on a personal level, because, as you know, on the May 2005 mass killings by the government of the protesters in Andijan, some of those causes are linked also to religious teachings of the 23 businessmen who were on trial. So that's in the Fergana Valley, Osh is in the Fergana Valley, and the ICG report on Tajikistan also hints that the very restrictive Tajik laws on religion can also be a factor. And since the Fergana Valley is the most densely populated part of the former Soviet Union, with these very strangely marked borders all meeting in this very densely populated part of Central Asia, I think one really has to be very concerned about the future there. So, but having said all that, I do think that religious leaders could and should be more involved in peacekeeping efforts and educational efforts of various kinds. So I've met some Uzbek religious leaders a few years ago who were here on an official exchange, and they said the thing about the Uzbek religion law that most disturbed them was the exclusion of children from religious education. So I think that's another thing that should be addressed. So in short, I think there should be more attention paid to the restrictive religion laws as a potential destabilizing factor in present and the future, and possibly also to think of ways of trying to make the governments of Central Asia see that their restrictive religion laws and practice is a destabilizing force and has profound security implications. It's a long answer, but...
Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, add something to that. Well, Kyrgyzstan, I haven't studied that in detail yet, but I'm developing an interest in Kyrgyzstan because it presents a very unique case for the model that I talked about. Because, as you know, Kyrgyzstan is, the capital is almost in the northern border, and Osh is at the bottom of the country, and the country is divided by huge mountain lines, and the capital almost has no control over, or no ability to serve to the southern part of country, which is densely populated by Uzbeks, and the sort of frictions or tensions between these groups are also further exacerbated by the political situation, political problems between Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan. But recently, when Kyrgyz Prime Minister opened a school that I well, the kind of school that I mentioned, the Gulen-inspired school in Osh, in actually 17 April, he said that, well, we recognize the problems that we are facing due to our diverse multi-ethnic structure, but we need more and more this type of initiatives, because these initiatives bring together our people of Uzbek origin or Kyrgyz origin or others. And these kind of initiatives create a sense of Kyrgyz nationality. They feel more Kyrgyz than Uzbek or other ethnic identity. So it's a unique case.
Next question, yes, at the back, below.
Thank you very much. Two very interesting presentations, and I have a question about each of the two. Kathy, if I may start with you. You mentioned how the government tries to put religious groups and denominations into a box. I wonder, what is the rationale, you think, behind this? Is it because that they're too easy to marginalize and the others are too big or politically influential that they cannot fight against everyone? Basically, why is the government adopting such a policy? And then the reverse of that is, how do these religious groups react? What kind of recourse do they have against government intrusion and restrictions? And a question for Mehmet. That was a fascinating case study from Mardin, and I agree that Mardin demonstrates a representative case. But Turkey has deep historical grievances when it comes to its Kurdish population. There are processes of openness, like calling for constitutional reform. There is a government-sponsored Kurdish TV, radio, media, cultural access. All of that are progresses that we have witnessed in the almost latter part of the last decade. But the grievances run deep because the constitution, which is a main thing, does not still recognize a large portion of the population. Against this background, and given Gülen movement's excellent approach to dialogue across ethnic groups and religions, what role do you think there is nationally for the Gülen-inspired intellectuals, the schools, the education system, to really cleanse the Turkish system of its main flaw that is also a breeding ground for the insurgency? Thank you.
Well, why does the government try to control religious groups? Because I think, as I somewhat indicated, it wants to control as much as it can, basically, or as they can, which sounds sort of simple, but it's in many ways a legacy from the Soviet days, when the party and the party state controlled everything, and these people are all basically all products of that kind of system. Given your knowledge of and study of corruption, I think you can also say that the governments, to the extent that almost all of them are very corrupt, don't want interfering agencies and other groups that can call on higher values in ways that they can't try to control to the extent that they can. Obviously, they can't totally control what people, how people are summoned to the spiritual worlds. But I think that's one of the most disturbing things, actually, about the Russian banned books list. I didn't really. Oh, okay. Thank you. That is that the list began back in 2007 with 14 titles. Now it has over 800. And the procedure is such that any court anywhere in Russia can declare a work and a video, etc., extremist, and then it's automatically added to this banned books or banned materials list, and then it's banned throughout 10 time zones. And if you're found in possession, etc., just trying to distribute, then you face extremism charges. So I've talked to one Russian lawyer who actually said that he thinks that this is the beginnings of going back to attempts at thought control. I think that's probably hyperbole, I hope, but nevertheless, I think it does reflect that kind of instinct. And how do religions react? In varying ways. For example, the Russian Orthodox Church managed to convince the Russian government to, after it passed its restrictive law on NGOs several years ago, it managed to get the Russian government to agree to amend that law in the ways that it applies to religious organizations so that they don't have to submit all the detailed kinds of information about membership lists, etc., that NGOs still have to do. So in that sense, it did make use of its political authority with the Russian government. As far as Russia's largest religious minority, which are Muslims, they have successfully protested the fact that of theological books or materials on the banned books list, the largest are Muslim. And they managed to get the government to name an advisory council within the Justice Ministry to give advice from a more knowledgeable perspective as to what kinds of material do constitute extremism. But this is an ongoing debate. I've heard some people with official connections say that they want to amend the extremism law so that it's not just any court anywhere in Russia, but it would have to be the Supreme Court that would deem materials extremist. So that it would be at least some improvement. Of course, from an American perspective, this entire exercise is objectionable, but many European countries do have similar systems in place. As far as how groups outside Russia respond, where the situations in Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and sadly now Tajikistan are much worse, basically by going underground. And even then, that's no guarantee of not being arrested, of course. And that, of course, from a security perspective, constitutes a danger in and of itself, because when people are going underground, then all kinds of things can happen.
Thank you very much. And in view of the short time, I will be as concise as possible. And first of all, thank you very much for the excellent question. As I mentioned during my presentation, what happened in Mardin was simply people basically wanted to protect what they achieved by strengthening rule of law and institutions. And hence they adopted democracy and its institutions. What happened in Mardin in this sense is basically happening in maybe the last 10, well, pretty much 10 years in Turkey nationally. People of very different walks of life, very different worldviews, very different ethnic or religious views, they are all commonly trying to reinterpret their near history, understand each other, and in this due process, people are realizing how much ethnic Kurds have been oppressed in the country. But they are also realizing that it is not just the Kurds who have been oppressed. It is also non-Kurdish women who have been deprived of their right to education. They are also oppressed. And people who have been denied their rightful place in many state institutions just because of their religious convictions or way of life, they are also oppressed. So now, in general, there is an understanding that it is not Kurds versus non-Kurds. It is anti-democratic, authoritarian groups within the state apparatus and in the society in general, and the rest, the majority, who were oppressed by this anti-democratic group. And there's a process, a judicial process, social process, political debates going on, and hopefully it will be this change will be institutionalized with the reform of the constitution, and Kurds as well as many others who have long been oppressed will be given their rights and freedoms.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes, Sidkabi.
Actually, I have 2.5 questions for Katie.
Close to yes.
Thank you. Is it okay? You've mentioned the restrictive rules and regulations. My question is that I think it's done. What's the response of the civil society, and if there are some civil society organizations, to these restrictive rules and regulations in Central Asian countries, in some of the countries you mentioned, given the recent uprisings in some Middle Eastern countries? This is the first question. And second is that, likewise, what's the awareness of the Western and United States audiences in the Western countries and in the United States? And the health question, as I mentioned, would this awareness impact on the unfortunate situation in those countries?
Well, of course, there are many civil society groups in all these countries, with the possible exception of Turkmenistan. And maybe there are some in Turkmenistan, but the information flow from that country is so scant that we wouldn't really know. So other civil society groups, there have been varying kinds of responses. Some of it has to do with the Soviet legacy of atheism, there's tend to be splits. So many human rights activists are not that interested in religion. They have, unfortunately, a lot of other issues they can focus on, so they do. I was very surprised when I was in Azerbaijan a couple of years ago at a conference on civil society, and I talked about the problems of religious groups in Azerbaijan, which have only gotten worse. The other people in the room said, well, but then are they part of civil society? So I was very surprised by that kind of response. So again, it varies a lot, but there are many other kinds of groups. Human rights groups, of course, are concerned, again, to varying degrees. It expresses itself in varying ways. But there are still people, for example, from Uzbekistan who are human rights activists who still manage to get out regular information about what goes on in trials of mainly religious believers in Uzbekistan. As far as the Western response is concerned, I think there should be more concern. For example, the ICG report on Tajikistan that I keep mentioning, even though they pointed out the government Tajik policies on religion are partly responsible for the crisis in which the country now finds itself. When it came to recommendations, it didn't recommend at all that the Tajik government should reform its law on religion, and that Western governments should put pressure on the Tajik government in that area. It just focused on drug flows, which obviously is a problem as well, but it's another point. So as far as Central Asia itself is concerned, I'm worried that because particularly Uzbekistan plays a very important role in the northern distribution network, of supplies to Afghanistan, that the powers that be in Washington are, shall we say, increasingly turning a blind eye, or at least, you know, an eye that needs big glasses, as to a lot of the problems, the human rights problems, and particularly those relating to religion and religious believers. I mean, it's, you know, there are an estimated 5,000 prisoners. There are more prisoners in prisoners of conscience in Uzbekistan than in the rest of the post-Soviet countries combined. So I think that should tell us something, and I wish that more attention were paid to that. Thank you.
Thank you. As we just wrap up, I'll be calling Jenna to the front. I just want to bring attention, if you don't know, Fethullah Gulen is our honorary president at the Rumi Forum, and just some mainstream press. 2 days ago, there was quite a serious report in the BBC, and a few weeks ago in the Financial Times, so I invite you to read and listen. And Jenna, to you, thank you very much, and I'd like to thank the speakers today. Thank you.